The old floorboard creaked, groaning under his boot, just like it always did. But today, the sound echoed hollow, a drumbeat to the frantic thumping in his own chest. Dust motes danced in the lone shaft of sunlight slicing through the barn, illuminating a glint of tarnished silver beneath the warm planks. He swallowed hard, his throat dry as a desert creek bed. A revolver. Not just any gun, but the gun, its engravings a wicked whisper of a legend his pa had always forbidden. A chill, colder than any prairie wind, snaked up his spine. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an invitation to a dance with the devil himself. The sun was a lazy painter, smearing streaks of orange and purple across the vast canvas of the Arizona sky as Cole Jensen rode in. His ranch, a modest stretch of land bordering the Blackwood Canyon, usually felt like a quiet haven after days spent mending fences or tracking stray cattle. Today, though, a prickle of unease rode with him. Old Man Hemlock, his nearest neighbor and a man whose face was as weathered and carved as the canyon walls themselves, was waiting by Cole's porch, whittling a piece of cedar into what looked like a miniature longhorn. Hemlock, with his perpetually squinting eyes and a chew of tobacco always tucked in his cheek, rarely left his own spread unless trouble was brewing. "Afternoon, Hemlock," Cole said, dismounting his sorrel mare, settling his hat lower on his brow. The horse snorted, flicking an ear, sensing the subtle shift in the air. Hemlock spat a brown stream into the dust. "Afternoon, Cole. Heard something peculiar down at the general store today. Folks talking about a new bounty poster. Big one." He paused, his eyes, usually half closed, opened wide, fixing on Cole with an intensity that made Cole's stomach clench. "For a gun. A very particular gun, they say. One with a thunderin' Colt engraved right on its handle." Cole's hand instinctively went to his side, where the old, heavy revolver now rested in his holster. The very same one he'd unearthed just this morning from under his pa's floorboard. A cold dread, slow and creeping, began to unfurl in his gut. His pa had always been a man of few words, and even fewer secrets. But this gun, this wasn't just a secret. It was a phantom from a past Cole knew nothing about. Yet now, it felt like it was strapped to his own hip, pulling him into a story he hadn't asked for. The quiet predictability of his ranch life, a rhythm he'd clung to since his pa passed, was shattering. Hemlock's gaze lingered on him, a silent question hanging in the air. Cole's mind raced, 1,000 possibilities, each more dangerous than the last, flashing through his thoughts. He knew, with chilling certainty, that his world had just irrevocably changed. The news from Hemlock hung in the air like a storm cloud, refusing to dissipate. Cole spent the next few days with the revolver a constant, heavy presence against his hip. He rode his usual rounds, checking fences, but his eyes scanned the horizon with a new, unwelcome vigilance. Every distant dust cloud, every lone rider, sent a jolt of suspicion through him. The routine had crumbled, replaced by annoying anxiety. One sweltering afternoon, as Cole was watering his horses at the creek, a rider emerged from the shimmering heat haze. The man was lean all angles and shadowed eyes beneath the brim of a dust-caked hat. His horse was a bone-thin roan, and the man carried himself with a quiet confidence that spoke of long miles and even longer fights. He dismounted by the creek bank, letting his horse drink. Cole watched him, hand subtly near the colt. "Good water," the stranger said, his voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering across the ground. He didn't offer a name, nor did Cole. The silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken questions. "Been looking for something?" Cole finally ventured, his voice low. The stranger's eyes flickered, sharp and knowing, to Cole's hip. "Heard tell of a certain colt. Got a reputation." Cole's jaw tightened. Reputations ain't always true. A slow smile, devoid of warmth, spread across the stranger's face. "Sometimes they are, especially when folks are offering good money for 'em." He took a slow sip from his canteen. Name's Silas, and I'm in the business of collecting what's owed." The words hung in the oppressive heat. Cole understood. Silas wasn't just passing through. He was a bounty hunter, and the gun on Cole's hip was his target. The peaceful rhythm of his life, already fractured, now felt like it was slipping entirely from his grasp. Silas's presence, the quiet, predatory calm, made it clear that this wasn't just a rumor in the general store anymore. This was a real threat, breathing down his neck. Cole had always been master of his own land, but now, with Silas watching him, he felt a profound loss of control. The Colt, meant to be a hidden secret, was now a beacon for every desperate man in 3 counties. And he was losing his freedom, one tense moment at a time. The confrontation with Silas hadn't escalated, but the unspoken threat had settled deep in Cole's bones. He left the creek, the weight of the Colt heavier than ever. As he rode back towards the familiar, yet now unsettling silhouette of his ranch, a memory, sharp and unbidden, pierced through the heat haze of the present. He was a boy again, no older than 10, perched on a stool in the dusty general store. His father, a quiet, broad-shouldered man, was haggling over a sack of flour. Suddenly, a stranger, loud and swaggering, burst through the doors, brandishing a pistol. "Heard you got something valuable, old man." The stranger roared, his eyes wild. Cole's father, calm as always, merely held up his hands. "No trouble here, son." But his eyes, Cole remembered vividly, had been dark, like thunderclouds gathering. The stranger had laughed, a cruel, mocking sound, and then, inexplicably, he had spotted the small wooden horse Cole was whittling. He'd snatched it, crushing it in his fist. Cole's father had moved then, not fast, but with an economy of motion that belied his size. He disarmed the man in a blink, the pistol skittering across the floor. "You don't break a boy's toys," his father had said, his voice flat, dangerously quiet. The stranger, suddenly pale, had stumbled out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Cole had never seen his father so hard. Now, looking at the Colt in his holster, a cold realization dawned. That day, his father had been ready for something more than a simple dispute. The memory bled into the present, painting a new picture of his father, a man more complex, more dangerous than Cole had ever imagined. His pa had always preached peace, taught Cole the value of a hard day's work, not the quick draw. Yet, this gun, with its ominous engravings, told a different story. The revelation gnawed at him. Was his father a bounty hunter? An outlaw? The very thought churned his stomach. He'd always revered his pa, but this hidden weapon, this undeniable link to a violent past, was fracturing that image. He rode past the familiar landmarks of his ranch, the crooked fence posts, the gnarled mesquite tree, the weathered barn, but they no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a stage, set for a drama he was only just beginning to understand. He had a choice now: cling to the quiet, predictable life he'd built, ignoring the whispers of the past that clung to the Colt, or embrace the legacy it represented, stepping into a world of outlaws and bounty hunters. The familiar ache of solitude, a cowboy's constant companion, settled deeper. His heart screamed for the simple life, but his mind, now clearer, told him that ignoring the thunder would only make it louder. The decision, unspoken but firm, led Cole away from the familiar dirt tracks of his ranch. He rode east, towards the jagged teeth of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a place where legends whispered and men often disappeared. The Colt, heavy and warm against his hip, was a constant reminder of the path he'd chosen. He wasn't running. He was seeking answers, facing the very thing he'd feared since finding the gun. He found the confrontation not in a dusty saloon, but in the desolate quiet of a forgotten mining town, its skeleton buildings rattling in the ceaseless wind. A lone figure stood in the center of the street, silhouetted against the setting sun. Silas. He hadn't pursued Cole directly, but rather had waited, a spider in his web. With him stood another man, broader, more menacing, with a scar that twisted from his temple to his chin. This was the Serpent, a name whispered with fear in every outlaw camp. Silas broke the silence, his voice a low growl. "Took your time, Jensen. Thought you might try to outrun it." He gestured to the Colt. "That gun's got a price, and we aim to collect." Cole dismounted slowly, his eyes flicking between Silas and the Serpent. The air crackled with a tension thicker than the dust clinging to their boots. "This gun belonged to my father," Cole stated, his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The Serpent snorted, a guttural sound. "Doesn't matter whose it was. Only matters who holds it now. What's the legend?" Cole asked, cutting to the chase, his gaze fixed on Silas. "Why this gun?" Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "They say the man who carries the Colt that spoke thunder walks through fire. They say it was carried by the Ghost Rider, a man who brought justice with a thunderclap and disappeared like smoke. Bounty's on the gun, but a bigger one's on the man who carries it and can use it." A cold understanding settled over Cole. It wasn't just about the gun's value. It was about the legacy, the myth. He was a symbol now. The Serpent lunged, fast as a rattler striking, his hand blurring towards his holster. Cole reacted on instinct, a blur of motion. The Colt was in his hand, its cold metal familiar, an extension of himself. A shot echoed, sharp and deafening, and the Serpent stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, a look of shocked disbelief on his face. Cole hadn't aimed to kill, only to disable. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. From the shadows of a decaying building, another figure emerged, a rifle glinting in the dying light. A shot rang out, not from Silas, but from a third, unseen party. Cole felt a searing pain in his side, a fiery jolt that knocked him back. He gasped, falling to one knee, the Colt clattering to the dusty ground. Silas stood over him, a cruel smile on his face, the Colt now within his reach. Everything was lost. He'd walked into a trap, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and wounded. The legend of the gun had brought him only pain, and now it would be his undoing. The world blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. Cole lay in the dust, the searing pain in his side a constant companion. Silas and the Serpent were gone, taking the Colt with them. The silence of the ghost town pressed in, a suffocating weight. He was alone, utterly alone, bleeding and defeated. This was the raw, brutal solitude of the West, a familiar companion for a cowboy. But now it felt amplified, a profound emptiness that echoed the loss of the Colt, and perhaps his own identity. He managed to crawl into the meager shade of a crumbling saloon, pressing a hand to the wound, feeling the sticky warmth of his own blood. There was no easy escape, no quick fix. He had to think, to reevaluate everything. He'd walked into this, fueled by a nascent curiosity and a sense of duty to his father's legacy. Now, all he felt was the bitter taste of failure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Cole spotted something glinting in the fading light, near where he'd fallen. He crawled towards it, his arm aching. It was a small, crudely carved wooden horse, remarkably similar to the one he'd made as a boy. It had fallen from his pocket during the struggle. His father had carried one just like it, he realized, all those years ago in the general store. A surge of unexpected clarity washed over him. The carving was a symbol of peace, of the quiet life his father had truly valued. Despite the hidden thunder of the Colt, it wasn't about the gun or the violence it represented. It was about protection. His father had kept the Colt, not to seek trouble, but to defend against it. He saw now that the bounty hunters, the outlaws, they weren't after the gun for its legend, but for its power to wield it for their own dark purposes. He was wounded, yes, and without the Colt, seemingly helpless. But the wooden horse, a simple, forgotten trinket, had reawakened something within him, a last chance. It was a long shot, A desperate gamble, but he knew what he had to do. The Colt was a weapon, yes, but it was also a symbol, and he couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. He had to reclaim it, not for vengeance, but for the quiet peace his father had sought to protect. With a grim set to his jaw, Cole pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly, and started walking not towards safety, but towards the faint lights of a distant, unknown town. The next step in a journey that had begun with a hidden revolver and now, with renewed purpose, was heading towards its unpredictable end. The final confrontation unfolded not with a roar, but with a calculated silence in a dusty, forgotten saloon in a town called Redemption. Cole, his side still aching, had followed the whispers, the trail of loose talk and nervous glances, until he found Silas and the Serpent celebrating their supposed victory over a bottle of cheap whiskey. The Colt that spoke thunder lay on the bar between them, a dark, gleaming promise of power. Cole didn't burst in with a dramatic challenge. He walked in, slow and steady, his eyes fixed on the gun, then on the men. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken words. Silas saw him first, his smile fading into a sneer. Well, if it ain't our ghost." "That gun belongs with me," Cole stated, his voice low but firm, carrying the weight of his journey. The Serpent laughed, his voice raspy. "You're hurt, cowboy, and you ain't got a gun." "I don't need one," Cole replied, his gaze unwavering. He was tired of running, tired of the fear. He had faced his demons, literally and figuratively, and in the quiet resolve that settled over him, he found a strength deeper than any weapon. He knew the Colt's true power wasn't in its fire, but in the principles it represented: protection, defense, a legacy of quiet courage. He made his move not for the Colt, but for the bottle of whiskey, knocking it over, sending shards of glass and liquid scattering across the bar. It was a distraction, and in the ensuing chaos, Cole lunged, not for a gun, but for the Serpent's legs, sending him crashing to the floor. Silas, startled, went for the Colt, but Cole was already there, tackling him, sending them both sprawling. It wasn't a clean fight. It was a desperate, brutal brawl, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer will to survive. Cole, despite his wound, fought with a quiet ferocity, his movements economical, honed by years of hard work, not gunfights. He disarmed Silas, the Colt sliding across the dusty floor. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he pinned Silas, his gaze steady. "The legend ends here," Cole rasped, not as a threat but as a statement of intent. He wasn't the Ghost Rider, he wasn't an outlaw. He was just Cole Jensen, a rancher who protected his own. When the dust settled, Silas and the Serpent were tied up, waiting for the town sheriff. The Colt lay on the bar, no longer a terrifying enigma, but a tool, a burden, a symbol. Cole picked it up, the weight familiar, but now it felt different. Not heavy with dread, but with responsibility. He had faced what he feared most, and in doing so, he had transformed. The quiet life on his ranch would never be the same, but he knew he could face anything now. He had found his own thunder, not in the roar of a gun, but in the quiet strength of his resolve. He rode out of Redemption at dawn, the Colt holstered, no longer a secret, but a part of him. The sun, a golden orb, painted the distant mountains, and Cole felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in weeks. He hadn't become a gunslinger or a legend. He had become something more profound, himself. The legend of the Colt that spoke thunder would continue, perhaps, but now it would whisper of a quiet man who carried it with purpose, not fear. As he rode, the vast, silent land stretched before him, an endless canvas for a new journey, and in the heart of the cowboy, a quiet thought echoed. Some legends are forged not in fire, but in the quiet courage of a man finding his own way home.